Kat, welcome back.
Thank you for having me. I love what you've done with the place.
It's
very
looking
festive.
a little busier than when you were last here about a year ago.
Yes.
How have you been?
Lacking in tinsel, so I'm delighted to actually be overloaded by it today. But yeah, extraordinarily well. How about you?
I've been very good, very good. I've been excited for our second chat. Yes. It's been a little while. Last time you were on, you told a very emotional story, which I'm sure many people will be able to relate to. So perhaps we can start there. What's your earliest memory of feeling different? Were you bullied?
There's this really odd thing about difference or feeling different, is that in my experience, you may not necessarily feel different, but it becomes evident that other people think that you are. And so you're merrily going along on your path, you know, la-la-la-ing through the world, not a problem at all. But then you keep coming up against these people who are like, oh, you're weird. And you're like, am I though? I'm just, you know, going around doing whatever. And if you come up against enough of those people, whilst also just thinking, I'm quite happy with who I am, I'm quite happy with the things that I like and that I'm doing, it just becomes this enormous, more than a disconnect. It's incredibly hard to deal with. For stupid reasons related to my growing up in the 1980s, I was moved up a school year at 7 for being tall. And that missing school year, I think, it turned out to be quite difficult for me and my prospects as a cool girl by the fact that I just missed out on this whole year of socializing and knowing how to socialize with other people on my level. And, you know, it just didn't get much better, particularly when I moved to the countryside. And oh my God, turns out I was ginger, Alex. I was ginger all along, which was a shock to me because I just thought I had red hair and that was fine. But no, turns out I was guilty of a million different crimes. And yeah, again, it's just difficult when you discover that the person that you thought you were turns out to be somebody very different to other people.
I think there's a point in so many neurodivergent people's life, often early on, when they have that realization that they're different. And often it's sometimes as a result of lots of exposure to little comments, little criticisms, little micro corrections, like stop fidgeting. Why can't you just be normal? Do you think yours was a singular moment, or do you think it was a gradual realization over a period of time?
It's so easy to look back now and be like, well, I think when I was 7, this happened, when I was 10, blah, blah, blah. I remember when I was first coming to terms with the idea of my having been and continuing to be depressed over the years, looking back to when I was 11 or 12 in my second year of secondary school and thinking, yeah, okay, that was when that sort of translucent film came down over my brain, if you like, and sort of everything started to feel a bit dampened since then. But it's so difficult once you're going through something to sort of notice something standing out more than others. I do know that things that I experienced as a child in secondary school in the 90s were very different to what a child at secondary school now is experiencing, not least because we didn't have social media. So for all the bad that it does, you know, we were also sort of entirely isolated if we didn't have, you know, pals on our wavelength or something like that. But also, if you were different or weird or sad, that word that went around a lot when I was at school, I don't know about you, then you just sort of had to pick it up, because it wouldn't necessarily just be your school fellows who would pick up on that. It would be the teachers as well.
Very much so. I mean, someone said to me on the playground when I was 7, you could be one of the cool kids, Alex, if you weren't so weird. so there's so many comments like that, I think, that I think as a standalone comment doesn't sound too damaging, but I think when you add them up over years and years, they can compound to create someone who truly does feel like there's something wrong with them.
Yeah.
And then you learn the solution, right? I feel like we're very good problem solvers, and we recognize the solution to feeling different was to change who we are. Do you think your masking journey started early on?
I think it was... What is so difficult is that I think when you're bullied, it's not like how it's often laid out in books or popular culture, which is that the bullies are bad 24/7 and you were good 24/7, and they're just constantly mean and stealing your lunch money and eating your crisps and whatnot. the people who picked on me were really funny and charismatic, and that actually almost made it worse, because when they weren't being total dicks, and it was mostly boys that bullied me, you'd just be like, but you're really good at art, you're really funny, you're really good looking, and I'm just a bit mystified by what's going on here. But you're so right, thinking about almost like the death by 1,000 cuts, and one of those rumors that has almost become fact is about the number of negative comments that somebody with ADHD hears before a particular point in time, even though there's absolutely no way of documenting that at all. We've just all been like, yeah, sounds fine. Yep, take that as fact. But there is that thing that however strong your sense of identity and strong your sense of self, as a kid, that is still forming. And so when you do hear enough sort of negative things about yourself, then even if you don't necessarily believe them, there will still certainly be an element where you're taking quite a lot of those on board and thinking, well, all these people are saying all these rotten things, and they're all doing it to me for some reason, and I don't know why.
I think those comments, they don't always need to be direct. They can be little body movements. You could say something and someone could just dismiss what you've said, and you pick up on them, I think, as a child. And rejection sensitive dysphoria, this horrible, instant, visceral, physiological response to criticisms and rejections. Did you experience that much as a child?
I feel like I experienced it much more in my 20s once I sort of left the safety of school and university, even though I didn't necessarily feel particularly safe at university, or because I had horrendous insomnia and was always worried that I was going to flunk out, and therefore where would I go? What would my life do? All that sort of thing. So once I was sort of on my own, as it were, then my horror, you're so right using that word visceral, but I really experienced that as just absolute horror of getting something wrong, of upsetting a friend, or being weird or just off in some way. Because, when you're a kid, you can probably be slightly more oblivious to that because you're just learning what social interaction is, full stop. You're learning how to behave with different people, whether that's people that you get on with really well, or perhaps distant family members or school or that sort of thing. So then when you have supposedly learnt all of that, but you're still finding things difficult for reasons that you don't quite understand, particularly when your contemporaries at least give the impression of being able to deal with everything with significantly more ease than you, then that is mystifying and really alarming.
It's so impactful. I think when you're bullied or you're exposed to comments that make you feel different, you change who you are. It can make you so susceptible to this horrible feeling of rejection sensitive dysphoria. And when you're tiptoeing around life, whatever stage you are, and everything you do is in avoidance of that horrible pain, that visceral physiological pain, it calibrates how you respond to the world. I think it turns you into a people pleaser, a perfectionist. You're so worried about letting other people down at every given turn that you subconsciously, you're putting other people's needs ahead of your own. And I think the long-term effects of someone's self-esteem when you're not putting yourself first can be devastating. Do you think you have been a people pleaser throughout your life?
Many people who know me would be like, absolutely not. No. I think I've probably ironically tried to be a people pleaser. I've just really sucked at it. I think because, again, being incredibly tall and having red hair and therefore standing out in that way, it would have been very helpful if I had found comfort and reassurance in trying to mask and fit in by wearing, I don't know, clothes that everybody in my generation or where I grew up wore. But again, trying to find clothes to fit a giant woman, essentially, in the 90s, particularly in like the middle of the countryside, was just an absolute non-starter. I think what I did instead was almost try to anticipate people's needs and not always do that very well. So it might be at work, trying to do something really well or in advance, and then absolutely beating myself up if I didn't do it right. I remember I was working at the film magazine Empire, which is my favourite magazine.
I used to get that delivered every month.
God, I love it. I won a competition to be their junior trainee writer, and I challenge you to find you're a junior person job title than that. I was just over the moon about it and so desperate to sort of do well, which obviously is a terrible way of sort of starting any job. You want to be keen, but not like desperate to do anything. And so I remember interviewing a bunch of people, including Patrick Stewart, at a premiere about the new X-Men film. And I dimly remembered him having given me like a lovely little, tiny little exclusive about the forthcoming film. And then I got home really late, and then God knows what happened, but I ended up somehow recording over my entire interview with him on the red carpet with BBC Seven. And thinking about that visceral response to RSD, emotional dysregulation, whatever you want to call it, just screaming in my bedroom into my pillow, because I could just feel all my worth as a human being had just drained out because I'd screwed up by recording over it. Even though, let's be real, nobody was going to give some junior tiny person on a red carpet and another film a little exclusive about one of the biggest films around. But my perception of that was so warped and so just through a glass darkly that all I could think was that everything had just disappeared apart from this pulsating light that just like, you useless idiot. And it's that sort of thing that is just so awful, because at that point, every sort of negative thing that you've ever done, that you've ever, worked really hard to sort of tiptoe around, everything that you've, ever tried to avoid in order to try and make people think that you're an actual sentient human being, just disappears.
I think when we do actually do something that would be defined as a slip up, if you like, it kind of reinforces that internal critic sometimes that we work so hard to silence, or at least to contradict. When was the last time that you were triggered with RSD?
I'm never quite entirely sure if it is RSD or just as a therapist, rather than, thankfully, somebody on the street once told me that I am just not very good at sitting with discomfort. And that's mental discomfort rather than, oh no, my diamond shoes are too tight, that sort of thing. One time I was trying to do some paint stripping in a room and got it, God knows how, I'm not a natural DIYer, as will become evident, but I managed to get some in my hair. And instantly that sort of pinpoint just happened. And I was like, it's going to go burrowing through your skull and this will be awful. And I just had this completely insane, disproportionate response and went straight to the bathroom, burst into tears, but like the ugliest, loudest, most massive like crying fit that you've ever imagined. And obviously it was totally fine because people have been idiots before and have probably fit this stuff, God knows where. But it was just the magnitude of this response completely out of proportion to it. In terms of anything else, I'm so thrilled to say that it doesn't happen anywhere near as often as it used to. And that I know is one, because I understand my brain a bit better now. I'm loath to say that I have complete control to the manual. But also it's so boring. I really prioritize sleep to the extent that when it is this dark outside, oh, you bet I'll probably be in bed like before 9 o'clock. Yeah. I probably won't be asleep by 9 o'clock because, I'm not an 80-year-old woman, but I will at least just be nice and cozy and in bed and winding down and all that sort of stuff. Partly because if I am up and downstairs, I just start craving Maltesers like there's no tomorrow. So the minute that I start even thinking about just going and inhaling the quantity of the co-op, then it's just like, just go to bed. I'd like to say I'm eating better, but that's again largely linked to not eating as many Maltesers, etc., and all of my other, junk food habits, drinking more water, all of that stuff, and actually remembering to take my medication more days than not, for which also I largely have to thank my husband, because he very often will just bring it to me with water and electrolytes to stop my clacky mouth. I think largely, as much as it makes me feel like Barbara Cartland or somebody very grand, it's more that a medicated wife is better than the alternative. But I just cannot overstate the importance of understanding why things are running through my brain in that sort of way. And so then if I do have an outsized response to something, I might run through the acronym of HALT: hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Even worse, God forbid, my noise cancelling earbuds or headphones or whatever have run out of battery. This cannot be allowed to happen because dealing with the tube or any kind of public transport isn't possible without it. But also, when I first got my dog years ago, the charity that we got her from linked me with this dog training group, and it introduced me to this concept of trigger stacking, which I now use mentally for everything, whether it is my small nieces and nephews, mostly for me. But it's this idea that whatever thing has just sent you over the edge, that's not really the thing at all. It's the 10 or so small things that have all added up beforehand to throw you over threshold. And it just means that then I'm sort of mentally counting through that in my head and being like, do you know what? We're probably going to stay in and watch an episode of The Doghouse tonight rather than trying to go to the cinema, because you haven't got the levels yet to go out into the world after work.
There's the straw that broke the camel's back, essentially.
Yes, exactly that.
What about holiday season? We're in December, Christmas time. Does that affect you if you find out there's parties going on and perhaps you weren't invited?
Massively. Actually, I gave up drinking about 6 years ago, which sounds like, it was really easy. I'd been trying to do it on and off for about 10 years beforehand, or rather not trying to give up drinking, trying to make myself a better drinker. I loved alcohol. I found it fabulous for parties, for making me more interesting, etc. Loved Christmas party season, basically because I could just go and drink with a load of people, but this time in sparkly outfits. Fabulous. And so when I stopped drinking, I found parties and everything, I found the idea of them almost unbearable. And the number of times that I would have some kind of panic attack and just be like, I can't go because everybody will be looking at me. Spoiler alert, the biggest discovery that I have made through my life so far in all my 43 years is nobody gives a crap what you're doing unless you are inconveniencing them in some way. People simply are not looking at you because they're looking at themselves, they're looking internally at themselves, they're looking at their friends, they're looking at that person they fancy over there. You are essentially a non-playable character in their role-play game. And that is incredibly freeing. But because I'd relied so heavily on delicious, lovely alcohol and all its many forms to sort of be like a BFF when I was in awkward situations, the minute that I stopped having that, before I sort of went through and worked out why I needed that prop so much, it was really hard. So now I'm actually really happy to go to parties, partly because it turns out that the only problem with the only person who had a problem with alcohol in my social circle really was me. And so now I go to parties and there isn't really anybody who triggers me because it was my behaviour that was the problem. I don't go to loads in the evening and I do tend to tap out after a couple of hours. But I can still go and have a lovely time and, more importantly, stand by the entrance, by the kitchen and hoover up all the canapes as they come out.
Such a good way to think about it, that you are such a small part in so many other people's lives, because otherwise it can get so consuming. You think they are thinking about you. If you have an interaction with someone on the street or at work, like you are a tiny dot on a little corner on a page that is their book of life. And maybe you have a big interaction with them, maybe it turns into something, maybe it doesn't. But when you frame it like that, you take back so much power, and so much of worrying about what other people think about you gets taken away. How much does this all affect your ADHD mission? Like, what is your ADHD mission, and what do you think you're doing to achieve it?
Alex, can I confess something to you? I am an absolute chaotic trash panda. I have no mission at all. My mission is whatever side quest I'm on at any given time.
Yes, very, very relatable.
My most recent mission was catching up on Stranger Things before the new season came out. Before that, it was inhaling all of a lovely Korean drama called Romantics Anonymous on Netflix. I've also been in search of the perfect rucksack for, I would say, about the last 8 months. Spoiler, that turned out to be the first rucksack that I'd looked at in the first place. I think a very common thing for people of any flavour of neurodivergence, but particularly ADHD, is this feeling of, loads of other people seem to be able to focus on one thing, one career, one interest, one group of friends. In my case, one accent. Incidentally, nobody else in my family speaks like this. I swear this is just the product of television. It's completely insane. But for me, certainly I had, growing up, loads of interests, lots of different groups of friends. And I always felt like I was a bit broken in that way. Yet another way to, beat yourself over the head. My brother has had a really solid group of friends since his teens, and I really, really admire that. And I've got lots of friends who I've known since I was little, but they're not all in one group. And I think that's basically for a similar reason that I don't have a sense of ADHD mission, because actually when the book was coming out last year, I knew, as somebody who had previously worked in social media, what I should do to, really amp up my excitement and other people's, hopefully, about the book, and that I should film loads of content and do lots of helpful things and bring the chapters to life and really finally master Canva, which, oh my God, I just can't. I'm not a graphic designer. And I just didn't do any of it. I did a few videos that I wanted to do at the time, and that was pretty much it, because there were lots of other things that were drawing my attention as well. And I think for me, subconsciously, my wanting people to understand more about themselves and also the media landscape that we're in right now, that was sort of a part of that mission, but it was all tied in together with the other things that I like to do and I'm interested in, which, without sounding like a completely insane Robin Hood wannabe, is basically, look at that injustice over there. But also hopefully with a bit of humour, showing people the ways in which we're similar, whether it's ADHD people getting knocked over the head, or trans people, or, very tall women with insane accents and red hair. That's admittedly quite a niche, but still. But hopefully helping people to unite in looking at the real people who are causing problems, who are what I call twerps now. Can't really be bothered with thinking about reform or anybody else in more detail. If it is somebody who is proselytizing at length about something that they know nothing about at all, then I'm afraid they're a twerp. And that is my best way of dealing with that sort of thing and not giving it any more airtime or any more brain space. And I want to probably empower people to look at somebody, question whether they have any knowledge or understanding at all, whether they are coming from a bad faith space or a good faith argument, and, work out the amount of attention that they give them accordingly. And if it's a bad faith argument, just go, a twerp, leave them alone, and just laugh at them, point at them and call them weird. And we know a lot about that.
It's a very good descriptor, twerp.
It's drastically underused. Yeah. Bring it back specifically for all of these idiots.
And you wrote your brilliant book, It's Not a Bloody Trend. How long before that was your diagnosis?
It was about 3 years. I hadn't been thinking about writing an ADHD book at all. And then in Christmas 2022, I left my phone in a drawer for Christmas week and obviously was completely climbing the walls after about 3 days. But it meant that I had enough brain space to sort of be like, actually, I'd really like to write something about this insane mediascape that we're in, but also analyse the fact that this is just a repeating pattern that we see through society over and over again. So I wrote the book proposal very quickly and wrote it in about 3 months.
It's a question I find fascinating. When you got your diagnosis, what fell into place? Did you look back and think, wow, that decision really makes sense?
I had the biggest, rosy, glowy, everything's wonderful, I understand myself so fully right now moment after my assessment, not least because my lovely assessor gave me some really wonderful words of wisdom, which I did put in the book. I mean, not even wisdom, but just comfort, and something that I think everybody with ADHD needs to hear, which is that you've been operating on hard mode. You've been doing all this stuff without any understanding or any support, really. And you should be incredibly proud of everything that you've somehow managed to achieve despite your own best efforts and everybody else's. I think I'd always tried not to have any regrets. which obviously is incredibly hard when you have a lovely litany of ADHD-related mistakes behind you, but just to accept those as part of my experience, my story, my journey, to use that ghastly word. But obviously, if you don't have a reckoning with what you've gone through to get to the point that you're at now, then it's going to happen at some point. And I say that as somebody who's very merrily just sort of gone, well, I'm not going to feel bad about infertility because, it could be worse. I could be a Victorian chimney sweep in, olden days and stuck up a chimney or something like that. Or, oh, I'm not going to feel bad about the fact that I only discovered I had ADHD now. Well, I'm not going to feel bad about the fact that I had a hip replacement and it got infected. And for 3 months, I was capable of, nothing. But if you do that too many times, there's going to be a point where at some point your mind is like, actually, this has all been quite a lot. And I think we really need to have a sit down and quite a hard think about it. And actually, when I spoke to Professor Susan Young for the book, one of the greatest privileges of doing that book and speaking to people who are legitimate experts as opposed to just a journalist with a recent ADHD diagnosis was just winding them up and watching them go over what they were interested in. And one of the many amazing things that she told me was that actually, after you have a diagnosis in adult life, whether it is through an assessment or through your own understanding, there needs to be a period of acknowledgement and mourning almost for what could have been, because obviously our lives are all made up of the decisions that we've made along the way. And you can only ever see the path once you've done it, a little bit like when you're trying to write a CV. But you do just need to have a moment to sit down and be like, wow, if I'd known when I was a child, and I mean, I've spoken to people who got diagnosed at 14 and they still wish that they'd been assessed and diagnosed when they were younger. Just, I think, to know that, it's not that I was, to borrow that book title, crazy, stupid, or lazy. It wasn't that I was too sensitive or, too much or too dramatic, too. It was just that, my neurotype is different and I operate in a different way. And what is incredibly healing, I think, apart from actually, for me, eventually stopping, going, everything's fine, and actually sitting down with a therapist and crying reasonably expensively tears every week until I had sort of, worked on acceptance and radical acceptance, and that who you are as a person, regardless of what you do, regardless of how productive you are or what you put in the world or how many children you do or do not have, what your job is or isn't, that you're good enough as you are. And to be honest, that can be one of the hardest things I think certainly I've ever had to come to terms with, because I've, never felt that way. And so it's quite nice now to be like, well, you are allowed to go to bed at granny o'clock and you don't have to try and write the next Pulitzer-winning novel whilst you're there. You can literally just read some Dungeon Crawler Carl novels, scroll through Reddit for a bit and go to sleep. And what a luxury, I think, to have finally got there. And I really hope that everybody, to whatever extent they recognise that, gives themselves the grace and the time to get to that form of acceptance.
What do you think would have been different in your life had you got your diagnosis earlier? If you had that explanation for those highly caffeinated squirrels in your head at a younger age, what do you think could have been different?
Oh, I'd have got even more roles in my local youth theatre, definitely. I'd hopefully have been a less unbearable child. And actually, that's a horribly unkind way to speak to my younger self. But I mean, oh my God, Alex, I was such a drama child, just obsessed. One of my friends and I, despite never having watched an episode of Friends, were so caught up at the age of 10 with the whole popularity of it that we wrote and performed Friends, the play. I think I still have the scripts for it now, and it's just absolutely horrendous.
What character were you?
It doesn't matter. I was all of them, and director and producer. I think the phrase like "would anybody like a warm drink" was literally written because we didn't know about coffee then. It was the early 90s. I'd love to say that things would be completely different and, I would have grown up with more understanding. As it was, I grew up with lots of understanding for myself because I inadvertently gravitated towards books that were written by incredibly damaged women / people that we might consider to be neurodivergent. I got a lot of support from books, from fiction particularly, but also we were growing up in the 90s. That was still better than growing up in the 80s, significantly better than growing up in the 70s, 60s, go back as far as you like. But me potentially getting a diagnosis back then was not going to change the fact that schools really could only cope with dyslexia, if that. We were growing up under Section 28, so whether or not you were gay, you were still going to grow up incredibly ignorant. And suppressed and all those awful things. So there were huge elements of people's personality, people's character, people's selves that were just being squashed. So I think when earlier I was sort of rather naively saying that I'd always tried not to have any regrets, I think for me actually that is probably a fundamental part of who I am, because it's not, hopefully it isn't stupidity or naivety. It is simply that I can learn from that. I can learn from how ignorant I was about particularly bisexual people. I had no idea about bisexuality, even when I was at sixth form. And I said and did some really, thoughtless things. So I'm always trying to learn from that, because just because I was bullied, it doesn't make me perfect or lovely or wonderful in all ways. But that is something that I can learn from and hopefully direct empathy towards other people without, removing their sense of self-responsibility.
A quick word from our sponsor. We've all had that nightmare. You're on that final warning from that friend. If you miss their birthday again, your friendship is over. Finito. And you do miss it. Even worse, you miss their wedding and you were giving the speech you forgot to write. I can change, you plead with them, and they say, no, you can't. Well, actually, you can. How? Tiimo app. That's how. Tiimo app has organised me in a way that's made me unrecognisable to my nearest and dearest. What ADHD? Tiimo's ultimate planning partner, checking in on you to see what you need help with and what chores you need to accomplish day to day. The important difference is Tiimo is designed by neurodivergent brains for neurodivergent brains, and you can tell it's built to adapt to your neurodivergent way of thinking and be flexible to your way of planning. And now it's even more simple with the AI Planning Assistant. Tiimo offers an incredible new voice transcribing service, making it even easier to use. It's almost so simple that it feels like a cheat code to play life on easy mode. Give it a go and use the link in my bio for 30% off. Just a note though, this code is only applicable on the web browser, not on the smartphone. Back to the show. And your character, Kat, have you always been true to yourself, or did the diagnosis open your eyes to how much of an expert you are at playing a character called Normal?
Alex, I don't want to blow my own trumpet, but I was quite a good actor when I was little. It was only really once I got to university and was like, there is no flipping way I could make a career out of this, which actually I think is an excellent way of weeding out people who really shouldn't be in acting at all, because it should only be people that don't want to do anything else, that couldn't do anything else. In terms of character or sense of self, I simply didn't have one at all. I didn't know who I was because, as mentioned, I was probably about 12 different people, depending on who I was with, depending on what I was talking about. My dad now does joke in a not too passive-aggressive way, I think, about what am I going to be an expert in today, #freelance journalism. But actually, I think there is also a huge element of truth to that. There are so many passions that I've had over the years that, growing up, there was, no use to being so interested in them or learning about them or pursuing them. But I can tell you that the novels of Gilly Cooper and Terry Pratchett and also the wider works of Pokemon have all been things that have been immensely useful and enjoyable to me as a journalist, as a writer, but also just because loving something is a wonderful thing to do. whether it's an art, a piece of culture, just some way that you're going through life and meeting other people who love that as well. I'm still fairly abysmal at cryptic crosswords, so that's very much an ongoing work in progress. But again, it's just so lovely to have lots of different enthusiasms and eventually hopefully get to a place where they feel almost more like powers that you can call on, as opposed to, oh, why couldn't I concentrate enough to go and be a consultant at Accenture? I mean, I don't know if that's what people at Accenture did or do, but that just seemed to be what lots of people at my university went to do. And the only thing I think that I knew was that I don't think I can do whatever that is, but hopefully I'll find something that I can do at some point.
Do you think women mask differently to men generally?
Fuck knows. No, this is awful. I can really only sort of speak from my own experience and from people that I've chatted to. I mean, I'd say it probably depends quite a lot on the ADHD presentation, if you like. Somebody who leans more hyperactive, impulsive might be able to mask just by sort of blending in quite an optimistic, gregarious, charming way, and sort of mask just simply by making everybody around them feel really good about themselves. Somebody who's perhaps more internal might be sort of looking around at everybody that they're with and sort of almost trying to take the temperature of the group to sort of see what's acceptable behaviour and go from there. The one unifying factor, I think, whoever you are, male, female, anything, and of course, once you add all the complicating factors of race, gender, sexuality on top of that, is that you're just trying to not necessarily fit in, but sort of trying to work with what you've got. And also at the end of a day, whenever you've had to mask in any kind of way, it can be really, really tiring. I used to think that I had incredibly low B vitamins, or maybe just my iron levels were through the floor, because I'd get home at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or whatever, and I would literally have to go straight to bed for like a minimum hour, 2 hours before I could sort of get up again and start thinking about cooking some supper or watching some telly or something like that. And I genuinely didn't realise, again, until I got a dog and learnt that if you want to tire out a dog, you give them a mental puzzle. You don't throw the ball for them 43 times, because then you just end up with a horrifyingly fit dog. But when we are having to use our brains so much, it is knackering. And when you're trying to sort of almost anticipate what the next puzzle is going to be, then that can just be really tiring too. And I really notice a difference in my energy levels, and now that I'm doing different types of work, in which I still have to unmask to a certain extent, because, you know, you can't just randomly go through an office shouting jolly things at the top of your voice, as though I'm sort of hailing sheepdogs across a hill or something. So there will always be an element of, you know, fitting in to a certain extent, but I'm certainly not having to squeeze myself into boxes in a way that I thought I used to. And I would say that, you know, a lot of men experience having to mask in a way that perhaps stereotypically we might anticipate a woman having to, just simply because of the way that their ADHD presents. What about you? How have you found it?
For me, I think the biggest realisation since my diagnosis was how much people-pleasing was a mask, and how much my knee-jerk reaction to agreeing to do things that deep down I didn't want to do, but in the moment when someone was asking me to do something, asking for my time, it was the path of least resistance in that moment to commit to that social event, or take on that new piece of work, or go to the gym with the person. And it was tiptoeing around having that shield that would block their approval being taken away from me. And you can't really understand what you really want and what you're trying to get out of the world and who you really are underneath when you're constantly putting everyone else's needs ahead of your own. For me, it was like the biggest realization was how much I had abandoned what I really wanted to do in an effort to avoid the horrible pain of being criticized.
Yeah. There's a lot of therapy speak doing the rounds on Instagram at the moment, and TikTok. I do not allow myself to go near TikTok, because that way being awake at 5 o'clock in the morning lies. But this idea about almost sending off these quite cold, analytical responses to things, whereas you're literally just a person, please don't be a dick about your interactions. And I think there's a really fine line to be had between, monitoring our own energy and making sure that we will be able to go to X, Y, and Z party because it will be important for us to show up for our friends, and being quite scattergun about it. And certainly I've had to really sort of reappraise the things that I say yes to, which in the moment I might be like, oh my God, yes, I'd love to go to the launch of an Earl Grey themed ice cream theme park, please. That would be absolutely wonderful. Nobody has invited me to that, but please, if you have one, invite me. I will come. But then also thinking that actually what I need to do is make sure that this week I have nights at home so that I can recharge, because on Friday there is a Christmas party with people who I really care about, and I know that being at a big party is going to be a little bit of a unknown quantity. So I just want to make sure that I can really give that my all. And to be honest, actually, if I go there and I've got enough energy and I'm prepped for it, I'll probably stay there for way longer than I anticipated and have an absolutely lovely time.
I wonder if because for me, I think that the metrics that I felt judged on was some kind of level of success as a man. So I feel like the steps that I was taught to take to achieve that success, to achieve the approval of society, was to work hard in school, go to university. And that's what I did. And looking back, I think the whole process for me of going to university was a mask. Because deep down, I wanted to stay in my bedroom at home and grow social media brands. And I was totally obsessed with social media. And I got kicked out of university after a year because I just couldn't find the motivation to maintain that mask. I tried going to some lectures, but ultimately the mask fell because my intuition, my knee-jerk reaction was to go back to my university bedroom and grow these social media brands. I think trying to follow the conventional route, and this isn't necessarily unique to men, but trying to follow the conventional route to success and what society deems as high performing, for me, was like a total mask. And I think that probably cost me about 5 to 10 years of development, trying to be something that society deemed to be successful rather than what I actually wanted to do.
And also that it's a safe backstop to have this, luxury of a university degree, but also because it's safe and people understand that. I also think I've certainly found in my experience and speaking to lots of other people with ADHD, this is obviously by no means everybody, but it's almost for a lot of us as though there is a compass with a true north. And that true north will direct us to something that we find purposeful, that we are passionate about, that we deem to be important, and also something that we want to do now, which is fab. Unfortunately, that compass will also just go around in circles whenever we're confronted with something that basically we deem to be bullshit, that is unnecessary, that is presenteeism, for example. I think that's a huge one for me. If I've done my work and I haven't got anything else to do, why am I still dicking around sitting in a chair for the next 2 hours? Can't bear it. So I think that's also somewhere where some elements of masking can be useful, but also, realistically, we just need to be able to go and do the things that are useful to us. I always find it incredible, Alex, that you experience this level of people pleasing and feeling like you needed to follow what other people needed, considering the insane and brilliant amount of success that you had with your company. It's actually quite depressing because I'd always it'd never been something that I thought that I could do. My brain just does not work in that way at all, sadly. But I always just assumed that if one was entrepreneurial and had a brilliant idea and it was executed really well, that everything would be totally fine for the rest of your life. So it's both reassuring and yeah, a bit gutting, actually, to learn that that's not the case. It's almost as if you're human like the rest of us. Outrageous discovery.
Well, rejection sensitive dysphoria and the people-pleasing that comes with that, yes, it nearly derailed the whole business story. I won't go too much into that because I've said it before, but when I was presented with a bit of paper to sign a contract, I should have listened to my internal BS radar, my judge of character, my intuition that was telling me, these two guys are not on your side. But because in that moment, that very precise moment in 2013, I was like, the path of least resistance in this very specific moment is to just sign, get away from it, don't rock the boat, don't annoy them. And it triggered a 5-year court case that tipped me into alcoholism, that put me into hospital. Like, that's the effect of the people pleasing and the impact it can have when you don't have an awareness that you're tiptoeing around this fear of letting other people down. It's masking. I think many people will relate to the concept of masking, the listeners and the viewers, 85% of which are women on this podcast. Why do you think women have been missed for so long in the conversation of ADHD?
Well, an exciting new thing that I learned recently, because God, we love to pick up these little bits of information, is that women and girls didn't actually feature in ADHD research at all until the year 2000. I mean, my God, I suppose it shouldn't be surprising, but it is one of those little nuggets of information that almost makes me feel quite cheery. Because it's like, well, of course, people like Reform and so on are being awful about ADHD now, because in the UK, it's still a relatively recent understanding, not a discovery, obviously. So we're operating on that backwards. And again, that idea that, people have only been able to have dual autism, ADHD diagnoses since 2013, that's another reason that has sort of blocked people out, particularly because not just women, but very often women, when going to their primary care provider or their GP to ask, hello, what's going on with my brain? Why do I feel like this? Will usually either be dismissed as having anxiety or depression, or perhaps be diagnosed with bipolar disorder or borderline personality disorder. They may have any and all of these as a comorbidity with ADHD, but without that actually being diagnosed, it doesn't make anything any easier. It just means that you go away, take a load of medication that may not necessarily work, have CBT that sadly very often will not work, although obviously it can be incredibly helpful for lots of people. But when you're sort of skirting around the actual issue of what's going on, it's important. You can't treat it. You can't deal with it at all. And so it's no surprise that now there are so many women, particularly, whose children are going through assessment and are then in turn tipping them to going through this questionnaire and going, oh, this sounds a little bit horribly familiar. What's going on? But unfortunately, people with bad faith arguments can't have it both ways. They can't say, oh no, everybody's being diagnosed, and oh no, everybody's self-diagnosing themselves through TikTok. If you don't want people to self-diagnose and leave it at that, people are going to seek assessment and they are going to seek support, particularly for something like ADHD, which unfortunately left untreated it's a minefield for substance misuse disorder, for accidents, for divorce, all of these things that sound completely, well, these aren't illnesses. They're not, but they are all side effects. They're all consequences of something that costs, globally a staggering amount of money every year. And so if by managing to actually assess people, triage them, help them get support, and at least get them on a pathway to understanding, because, even after all that wait for assessment, there's still going to be a significant wait for treatment. But ADHD meds have been around for 80 plus years. They are the most tested in the world. Doesn't mean they're all going to be perfect, because everybody is a special little snowflake and their body does respond differently to it. And everybody needs a different kind of scaffolding in terms of what treatment they have, because it's not a take a pill and all your problems are sorted condition. It's unfortunately very complex, and health systems don't necessarily deal very well with very complex, certainly without having their funding increased.
Thankfully, there's a whole generation of women coming through now and playing catch up, getting answers after years and years and years of being neglected, being told that they're crazy, misdiagnosed with an anxiety disorder, like you said. I feel like that generation for years had a lack of self-identity because they weren't given the proper answers to their concerns. What do you think are the consequences of someone coming through life without self-identity?
Certainly without understanding why your brain operates the way that it does. I can only say that I spent a horrifying amount of time just thinking I was defective, that I was an alien in a meat suit, if you like. It's so difficult to try and be a person in the world when you don't understand what game you're playing, if you like. I do know that when people get assessed, when they get a diagnosis, one, there is a huge amount of anxiety beforehand because almost without exception, people who have ADHD are terribly worried, I certainly was, that they don't have ADHD and actually there isn't an explanation and they're just going to have to feel this way for the rest of their lives. No, that's actually probably quite a big sign that you do have ADHD. It's not about having a label, if you like, although we all use labels in supermarkets because otherwise the big shop would be a freaking nightmare. But it is about understanding what manual you need to help yourself get through the world. My identity is not ADHD first. So, for example, people with autism often say that they are autistic. And Tony Lloyd has said, we don't say I am ADHDic. So my identity is not necessarily that I have ADHD, but it's certainly a huge part of who I am and how I see the world and consequently how other people see me. And so just understanding that takes a huge weight off because feeling that you're defective is really depressing and unhelpful. And it just means that you spend so much time trying to fix yourself when you have no idea what exactly you're trying to fix. You're just trying to squeeze your lovely square self into a round hole with no success.
What about our eternal pursuit of love and to be loved? How does a lack of self affect that?
Seeking how to be loved is one of the ultimate human stories. We want people to see who we are, whether we're neurotypical, neurodivergent, anything. That concept of a happy ending in terms of a love story applies just as much to platonic love, to familial love, to just being accepted in wider society. And God bless him, I think RuPaul really was onto a winner when he came up with one of his many, many, many excellent catchphrases. But if you're not going to love yourself, how the hell are you going to love somebody else? And that again ties into self-identity. I was a serial monogamist all the way through my 20s and early 30s, mostly because I was incapable of being on my own. Because when I was on my own, I just thought awful, panicky thoughts about what a terrible person I was, which is what a lovely girlfriend for somebody else to have. But it also meant that I wasn't aware enough of people who may not necessarily have my best interests at heart. It's like Tina Fey said in her wonderful memoir, Bossy Pants, the creepy sports coach is not looking for the beautiful child, he's looking for the damaged one, because that's your way in. And so the more understanding that we have of ourselves and the more self-knowledge that we have, the more that we can build ourselves up, the more that we can sit with ourselves and enjoy our own company and know how we work and know how we're going to work with a partner. And yeah, I'm hugely grateful to my incredibly tolerant husband for all of that. But I'm also doubly lucky that we've both spent the last 10, 12 plus years thinking that the other one has made a horrible mistake.
You've clearly come on an incredible journey, to use that word. Kat, truly inspiring. What would you say to some of the bullies if you could go back and see them, the ones that gave you such a hard time now that you've grown into such a strong and successful woman?
Am I a strong and successful woman, Alex? Please send this clip to my mother. I will be delighted. I dream about school a lot. I think that's reasonably common for lots of people. And what is odd, though, is I'm not necessarily dreaming about it in a stressful way. I mean, yes, occasionally I will have to do my GCSEs or my degree again, and that will just be horrendous. But every now and then I'm just around school and people that I was there with are just there. And I think that's partly because I feel quite wistful about the fact that perhaps if I hadn't skipped a year at school, but who knows, if I'd been diagnosed with ADHD or depression or anxiety or whatever, but who knows, that I might have been able to engage with all of these people on a more even keel, if you like, because children can smell difference like a shark can smell blood. And anybody is keen to move the attention onto somebody else. What I do know, though, is that just who you are as a child or a teenager, that's not who you are for the rest of your life. And hopefully, anybody that, said anything a bit crap or really crap to me through those years is now very much having a happy life with their families and just is a reasonably well-adjusted human being, because thank goodness nobody is who we are when we were 7, 13, 15 and so on. The one person who really was needlessly awful to me, I'm delighted to say, really got his comeuppance, to my mind. And I try not to be too gloating about it now, because for God's sake, I'm 43, move on. But somebody in his life became one of the most famous people in the world. And that really made me very happy for a very long time.
Could you say who the famous person was?
Yeah, afterwards, when I've made you sign a disclaimer.
Yeah, okay. Truly inspiring, Kat. Thank you so much for sharing your story and for coming back. As I said at the beginning, I was looking forward to this, and you've exceeded expectations.
Oh, I'll put that on my report card too. Thank you, Alex.
I want to move on to my favourite part of the show, which is the ADHD item section. Your ADHD item, your new ADHD item, has been patiently waiting underneath that cloth, and I'm going to reveal it now.
I'd completely forgotten it was there, so thank you.
Small one. Right, that looks like a pack of top trumps, specifically, who's the most lovable dogs?
Oh, yeah.
I'll pass that to you.
Thank you. My beloved husband gave this to me as a bonus Christmas present a couple of years ago. But this really stood out to me, if I can actually get into the packet. Childproof, obviously. This essentially, who's the most lovable dog, was how I sort of went through, I would say, all of my 20s. Who can be the most hardworking, who can do what you want or need, who can fill a gap. Size, rarity, good temper, cuteness. I don't think I would have rated myself at all well for cuteness or good temper, although I did try and have all my nervous breakdowns in the middle of the night where it wouldn't inconvenience people. This did not work. Size and rarity, I would say score pretty highly, but I just think this absolutely... It's just so hugely relatable to the amount of selves that we try to be to try and find what the right self is for a given situation, until we know that actually we have ADHD. And yes, there are probably all this many facets to who we are, but actually it's not a load of different dogs. It's all just one, and all of them are the most lovable.
Amazing. I heard a study that is connecting, and it's in its infant stage. I don't know how credible it is yet. ADHD in dogs. Have you heard about that?
I bought myself a book. It's very sweet. I think it's self-published, but basically I think it's aimed at very small children. It's basically just pictures of dogs with character traits that ADHD children and dogs have in common. And I read it several times and found it incredibly comforting. When I had my hip replacement, my dog Sybil, who's a golden retriever, had just had her elbows done. And so I was joking to my husband about the poor man having to look after 2 golden retrievers, both with joint problems. But I think there are a lot of traits that dogs and adults of any kind can have that cross over. But I don't think I could ever eat food as quickly as Sybil.
Yeah. My French bulldog is very much the same. He inhales his dinner. Your item will grace the shelves with all of the other ADHD items, Kat. I'm going to move on to the ADHD agony aunt section, which is questions from the audience. And it's in a washing machine. And it's called the washing machine of woes. And it's a washing machine because my ADHD item is a washing machine, because for me it represents memory loss. Always forgetting my clothes in the machine after the cycle's finished. And I do ask everyone, do you relate to that?
No, but only because I have such an incredibly exacting series of systems that means that I do actually take and hang out washing. Unfortunately, should the system break or I become tired or ill, then it absolutely falls apart. But I think if anybody with ADHD doesn't necessarily identify with something like that, you will find a structure of scaffolding keeping them together.
My scaffolding is the Tiimo app, which has helped. What's your scaffolding to remember to empty the machine?
I only do laundry on Thursday to Sunday. There's no laundry the rest of the time. And the dopamine that I get from doing it in different loads, from basically it going in and coming out clean or something and then being hung up is actually enough to sort of ensure that I get to do it. However, I should say I'm doing laundry for me and my husband, who cooks everything, so he gets a pass on laundry. We don't have kids. I would enjoy laundry so significantly less if I was having to do it for multiple people. And for anything like that, I hugely recommend a woman called the Lazy Genius, who has got an amazing amount of very ADHD-friendly structures and scaffolds for exactly this sort of thing.
Amazing, Kat. Not only a brilliant story, but brilliant hacks as well on the show today. This week, Kat, someone has written in and asked, I have ADHD and I'm premenopausal, which is becoming a struggle. I think I'm going insane. Do you have any experience with this? And if so, what was it like?
Oh, not at all. I've never been insane in my life. Alex, I'm afraid I'm going to have to school you on this. It's called perimenopausal.
What did I say?
So it's basically something that I only found out about what felt like about 2 minutes after my IVF had failed, when I was reading an amazing book by a woman called Heather Corinna called What Fresh Hell Is This? Perimenopause is basically up to around 10 years before actual menopause, which is actually a year to the day since your last period. So people talk about menopause, but that actually is one thing. And perimenopause tends to be when all your hormones start going, basically vibrating in a not particularly delightful way. So you might have just come out of motherhood when your hormones are all over the place anyway due to pregnancy. And then it's just another thing, literally just another thing. A lot of women with ADHD also have something called PMDD, which is basically a boss level version of PMT, or premenstrual tension. It's called premenopausal dysphoric disorder, I hope. I also have the washing machine memory. And it just basically means that PMT is even worse. Lots of women will find that their meds just don't work through certain times of their cycle. If you're perimenopausal, you may start hormone replacement therapy, which also has other different names. Lots of people are trying to reclaim it from being a replacement. And actually, if you have PMDD, you will need a significantly larger amount of estrogen than somebody who doesn't. So I discovered recently that the NICE guidelines say that if you have PMDD, that you should have as a baseline 100, I think it's milligrams, God, I'm so useful, of estrogen instead of 50, which is often a starting point. So there's all these fun things to discover. But what is brilliant is there is some wonderful literature and books by women who are specialists in ADHD and hormones. Lotte Borg-Skoglund, who I interviewed for the book, is an amazing researcher who's got a fabulous book, ADHD in Women and Girls, which is all about hormones and is just a really lovely read. And then that Heather Corinna one as well, I would absolutely recommend. There are also some perimenopausal specific Facebook groups, which, to be honest, is a reason enough to still have a Facebook account in 2025. But just, I would say, with anything like this, just make sure that you pick your experts carefully, and that make sure that your expert isn't just somebody else who's panicking, because it can be very easy for us to just start taking received wisdom from other people going through what we're doing. And then it's just a case of the blind leading the blind. And another one that I would really recommend is the ADHD Experts podcast. Not to recommend another podcast, sorry, Alex, but it's because it's literally lectures by scientists and researchers in the field. It's organized by Attitude, and it's just reassuringly expert. They've got some fantastic stuff for women and hormones specifically.
Very helpful, Kat. Thank you very much on behalf of the anonymous listener who's written in. Just finally, one more thing. I want to deliver you a letter that was written by the previous guest.
Oh, how lovely.
They wrote a letter to their younger self, and they posted it in this post office, and I'm going to deliver it to you, the next guest, if you could kindly read.
Oh, how lovely. Post in 2025, and it's not a Christmas card. To my younger self. Oh, I'm going to cry. This is gorgeous. I will actually share it with you now rather than just saying how lovely it is. To my younger self, you are so loved, not in spite of who you are, but because of who you are. You're not too much. You were enough. Keep shining your bright light. Don't dim it to fit in, because you will find a space to belong. Was that Donna Ashworth? It's like a lovely poem.
It's very nice. It's almost a summary of the conversation we've had today.
Yeah.
Really special.
Keep shining your bright light. Don't dim it to fit in. But do occasionally, just average it out if you're at the office.
Kat, really, really so grateful for you to come back. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Alex. It's just lovely. Merry Christmas!
Yeah, Merry Christmas.